My name is Betsy. I'm 63. I wear my lipstick like armor, and I've learned something the hard way. Life doesn't end when your marriage does. Sometimes it finally starts. It started with a bottle of milk and a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a carnival tent and into the fluorescent cruelty of aisle 7. She was standing by the eggs, not shopping, waiting. The kind of waiting that makes the air around a person feel slightly tilted, like a picture frame that refuses to hang straight. She caught my eye and smiled like she already knew my story. "Honey," she said, stepping close enough that I could smell something herbal on her sage. "Maybe, or trouble. He's cheating on you right now. In your bed. Run home. Around the corner there's a different man waiting for you. At least now you'll learn what it feels like to be loved." I laughed. I actually laughed. Because my John who liked his coffee the same shade every morning, my John who insisted on turning off every lamp in the house like we were personally responsible for America's power grid, my John who'd pat my shoulder in public like I was a dependable dog. John didn't cheat. John barely lived loudly enough to cheat. But my hand started shaking anyway, traitorous thing, and the milk slipped, shattered, and made a white splash across the polished store floor like the universe had thrown up at the thought of my denial. I apologized to the cleaner until my mouth went dry. I paid for the milk. I left my cart right there like an abandoned child. And I marched out of that supermarket with my purse bouncing against my hip like a drumline announcing, "Something is about to happen." On the drive home, my mind did that ridiculous thing minds do when they're scared. It tried to negotiate. Maybe the woman was wrong. Maybe she meant another house. Maybe she meant metaphorical cheating. Maybe she was a scammer. Maybe. And then I pulled into my driveway and saw it. A car I recognized. Not just some car. Not a similar one. No, the car. The silver sedan with the little dent on the rear bumper that John's secretary, Melanie, always joked about at office parties like it was adorable. My legs turned to warm gelatin. My mouth got that metallic taste, like I'd bitten a penny. I walked to the door and God help me, I still tried to be reasonable. Maybe she dropped off papers. Maybe John was sick. Maybe. Then I opened the door and saw women's shoes by the entryway. Not mine. Not the practical sort. High heels, elegant, expensive, the kind that say I don't carry groceries, I carry other people's husbands. I didn't even take off my coat. I walked in like a woman who owned the house. Because I did. And there they were on my living room couch like they were starring in a cheap romance novel with a terrible editor. Melanie in underwear like she was at a photo shoot. John in his favorite jeans like this was his idea of being casual. They were kissing. Not a mistake kiss. Not a drunken kiss. Not a we tripped and our mouths fell together kiss. A comfortable kiss. A kiss with practice. My voice came out clear as a bell. "Get out of here." Melanie's eyes went wide. John froze like someone had paused the television. I grabbed the red dress, mine, by the way, hanging over the chair like she'd brought it as a costume, and I threw it right at her face. And then I slapped him. A clean, sharp slap. Not the kind you do when you're helpless. The kind you do when you're done. Melanie scrambled for her clothes, mumbling apologies that sounded like a blender full of lies. She tried to speak to me like I was her aunt at Thanksgiving. "Betsy, I know," I said. "Not my name. You don't get to hold my name in your mouth." She ran out clutching her shoes like stolen goods. John stood up slowly, rubbing his cheek, blinking like a man trying to wake up from consequences. "Betsy, listen." "You don't listen," I said. "You benefit. You use. You take. And you assume I'll stay polite." I surprised myself with how calm I was. Inside, I felt like a house on fire, but outside, I was ice. Beautiful, dangerous ice. John tried the classic moves. The ones men rehearse without admitting they've practiced. "It didn't mean anything." "That's worse," I said. "If you'll destroy me for nothing, then what does that say about you?" He tried another one. "You've been distant lately." I stared at him. "You mean the last 15 years where I carried your life on my back like an overstuffed suitcase?" He flinched. And that's when the memories came rushing in, not like a sweet montage, but like a courtroom slideshow. Because yes, we had a love story once. I used to believe in it the way some women believe in God, absolutely, stubbornly, even when the evidence gets uncomfortable. The wedding, the warning, and the lie I told myself. I was 22 when I met John. He was handsome in that clean-cut way that made mothers nod approvingly. He had polite manners and those serious eyes that made you feel like he was taking your heart seriously. I fell hard. My family had money. Old money. Quiet money. The kind that doesn't sparkle loudly but has deep roots. My father used to say, "Our money is like a tree, Betsy. Don't let anyone come carve their initials into it. John wasn't poor exactly. He was ambitious, hungry in a way I found attractive back then, like a man reaching for the sun. When we got engaged, my mother pulled me into her bedroom the night before we went dress shopping. She sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair in long strokes the way she did when she had something serious to say. "Betsy," she said, "you should marry not the one you love, but the one who loves you." I scoffed, loudly. "What kind of advice is that? That sounds like settling." She looked at me in the mirror, not angry, not sad, just knowing. "Honey," she said gently, "love isn't just fireworks. Love is the person who stays when the fireworks stop." I didn't want to hear it, because John looked at me like I was the answer to his prayers. I mistook admiration for devotion. I mistook charm for character. And when my mother tried to press again, I said the most naive sentence a young woman can say: "I can't marry someone I don't love." My mother nodded like she'd expected that. "Then promise me one thing," she said. "If you insist on marrying him, protect yourself." And that's how I became the kind of woman people misunderstand. Because I was in love, yes, but I wasn't stupid. I signed a marriage contract, a prenup, ironclad, reviewed by 3 lawyers, the kind that makes men smile tightly at the edges. John tried to joke about it. "Planning for the divorce already?" "No," I said sweetly. "Planning for reality." He laughed. But his eyes didn't laugh. We got married in a small country club ceremony. White roses, string quartet, champagne towers, the whole traditional American fantasy. And I walked down the aisle thinking I was stepping into forever. What I didn't realize is that some men step into marriage like they step into a business deal. How I loved him. I loved John like it was my job. I supported him, encouraged him, made connections for him, smoothed his rough edges for polite society. When he wanted to start a business, I didn't just clap, I invested. My father gave us a generous gift that John accepted with a handshake that screamed gratitude, while his eyes quietly counted the zeros. John built a strong company. People congratulated him. They called him self-made. I always smiled, because I knew what I'd poured into that company. Not just money, but time, faith, introductions, patience, and 1,000 invisible sacrifices. And in return, John grew more confident, more important, more entitled. He started traveling more. He started staying late more. And I started making excuses more. He's stressed. He's building something. He's providing. I was loyal. Loyal like a golden retriever. Loyal like a soldier. I took care of him when he got sick. I stood by him when deals went wrong. I hosted dinners and smiled at clients and gave up weekends and kept our home beautiful and warm like a showroom. And then, at 63, I walked into my own living room and found him kissing his secretary. Not because our love died, because his respect did. The quiet revenge that isn't revenge yet. Back in the living room, John tried to reach for me. "Betsy, please let's talk." I stepped back. "Oh, we're going to talk," I said. "But not like you think." He swallowed. I walked past him, into my office, the one he liked to call Betsy's little hobby room, even though it was where I kept the family financial files. I opened the locked drawer. John followed, nervous now. "What are you doing?" "Taking inventory," I said. He blinked. "Inventory?" I looked at him over my shoulder. "You built your business on my family's money, John. You built your lifestyle on my faith. You built your comfort on my silence." His face hardened. "That's not fair." I turned fully then, slow and controlled. "Oh, I think it's extremely fair," I said. "And the best part is, I don't need to yell about it." I reached for the folder, the one labeled marital agreement. His eyes flicked to it. He knew. Oh, he knew. That contract he'd joked about. It wasn't a joke. It was a seatbelt. And today, the car had crashed. "I'm not playing the victim," I said. "I'm playing the owner." John's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I closed the drawer and held the folder against my chest like a Bible. "Pack a bag," I told him. "You're sleeping somewhere else tonight." He sputtered. "This is my house too." I smiled small, sharp. "No," I said softly. "This is my house. You just lived in it." He took a step toward me, anger bubbling now when the doorbell rang. We both froze. It rang again, a third time. Not a polite guest, a person with purpose. John frowned. I walked to the door, heart still pounding, and opened it. And there stood the same woman from the supermarket. Same mysterious eyes, same calm smile. Only now, she held a small paper bag in one hand and a boarding pass in the other. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. Told you. Now, are you ready to run toward your life? Behind her, parked at the curb, was a taxi with the engine running. And suddenly, the air felt electric. Because I realized something I hadn't let myself think until that moment. Maybe this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe this was the first page. And in the taxi window, for a split second, I saw the reflection of a man in the driver's seat, young, sun-browned, smiling like he didn't know my age, my history, or my pain. And like none of it would scare him away. The fortune teller winked. A trip, Betsy, she said. A clean cut, Miami, ocean air, new skin. John's voice thundered from behind me. Betsy, don't you dare walk out. I looked back at him, this man I had loved with everything I had. And for the first time in decades, I felt something new. Not fear, not sadness, not even rage. Just freedom. I turned back to the door, and I stepped outside. If you've never left a marriage in a taxi with a stranger holding your boarding pass, let me tell you something. It feels less like escape and more like permission. I didn't cry. That surprised people later, when they wanted the details. Women always want the details. Men want the verdict. Everyone wants a performance of grief. But grief had already lived in me for years, quietly, patiently, like a houseguest who never paid rent. The taxi smelled like vinyl and cheap air freshener. Coconut, maybe, or hope. I slid into the back seat, my coat still on, my heart doing somersaults like it had been promised something wild. The woman from the supermarket, no name, no explanations, leaned in through the open window. You'll be fine, she said. Just don't look back too long. Salt water heals faster when you let it. Then she shut the door, tapped the roof twice like a blessing, and walked away. I never saw her again. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. He was young, not boy young, but son young. The kind of face that tells you life hasn't had the chance to grind it down yet. Airport? He asked. Yes, I said. And don't rush. I've spent my whole life hurrying for someone else. He smiled like he understood more than I'd said. How? I didn't call anyone. At the airport, I didn't call my friends. Not a single one. Because I knew exactly what would happen. They'd rush over with wine and wide eyes. They'd hug me too tightly. They'd ask for details while pretending they didn't want them. They'd say things like, I always knew he wasn't good enough for you. At least you found out now. What are you going to do? And I didn't want advice. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want a jury. I wanted space. So I boarded the plane alone. And for the first time in decades, I ordered a drink without asking anyone if they wanted one too. Miami didn't ask questions. Miami greeted me the way confident people do, warm, unapologetic, and slightly flirtatious. The hotel had white curtains that danced when the balcony door was open, like they were celebrating my arrival. The ocean stretched out endlessly, blue and indifferent, which was exactly what I needed. On the first morning, I woke up early out of habit. John always liked breakfast at 7, but then I laughed. Out loud. A deep, surprising laugh that came from my belly. I went back to sleep. When I finally woke again, the sun was already high, pouring itself across the sheets like it had nowhere better to be. I walked the beach barefoot. I let the water touch my ankles. I took off my watch. No schedule, no responsibility, no man to manage, just me. That afternoon, I bought a dress I would never have worn before. Backless, blue, the kind of dress that says I'm not apologizing for my body. At 63, that felt radical. The man who didn't know anything about me. I met him on the third day. Of course, it wasn't dramatic. Life rarely announces its miracles with trumpets. I was sitting at a small beach cafe, my skin still warm from the sun, sipping something citrusy and irresponsible. He asked if he could share my table. That was it. No pickup line, no performance, no inspection. Just a man asking a woman a question and waiting respectfully for the answer. He was 23. Yes, I know, you're already counting. He had sandy hair, laugh lines that didn't belong to someone his age yet, and eyes that didn't slide over me looking for something younger. They stayed. My name's Daniel, he said. I'm here for the summer, surf lessons, college break. I'm Betsy, I said. I'm here because my life just fell apart. He blinked once. Then he smiled, soft and genuine. Then you picked a good place. He didn't ask how old I was. He didn't ask what I did. He didn't ask if I was married. He asked if I liked the ocean. And that's when I felt it, that quiet click inside my chest, like a lock opening. how he looked at me. Daniel looked at me like I was interesting, not impressive. That matters more than people think. He listened when I spoke. He laughed at my jokes not politely, but with surprise, like he hadn't expected me to be funny. He didn't flinch when I talked about my past. He didn't rush to fix it. He said, "That sounds hard," and let the silence sit comfortably between us. We walked, we talked, we shared fries like teenagers. And one evening, as the sun sank into the water like it was being swallowed whole, he reached for my hand. Just reached. Didn't hesitate. Didn't check. Didn't doubt. I thought about my age. I thought about my wrinkles. I thought about the mirror back home that John had stopped really seeing me in. And then I thought, what if I'm done living for mirrors? So I let him hold my hand, and it felt easy. Meanwhile, back home, John called. Of course he did. He left voicemails that started angry and ended panicked. "Betsy, this is ridiculous. You can't just disappear. We need to talk like adults. You're throwing everything away." I listened to one. Then I deleted the rest. Because here's the truth no one tells women my age. We don't throw our lives away when we leave bad marriages. We pick them up. The first night I slept without fear. Daniel kissed me that night, slowly, carefully, like he was learning a language he wanted to be fluent in. And when we lay together, he touched me like my body wasn't a problem to solve but a place to stay. I didn't feel old. I didn't feel young. I felt alive. The next morning, he made coffee in my tiny hotel kitchen and said almost casually, "I don't know what happens after summer, but I know I want to know you. All of you." I watched him move around the room, barefoot, humming something off-key, and I realized something terrifying and wonderful. I wasn't afraid of what people would say anymore. I was afraid of not choosing myself again. I picked up my phone, not to call John, but to call my lawyer, because some endings deserve paperwork, and some beginnings deserve courage. People think the hardest part of leaving a long marriage is loneliness. They're wrong. The hardest part is watching people panic when you don't. The business of endings. I flew back home exactly 2 weeks later, not because I missed John, not because I felt guilty, but because I am a woman who finishes things properly. My lawyer Martha, sharp as a tack and twice as quiet, listened without interrupting as I told her everything. She didn't gasp. She didn't frown. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She said, "Good. Let's begin." That marriage contract my mother insisted on, it bloomed like a well-watered garden. Half the business was legally mine. Not a negotiation, not a threat, a fact. John tried to delay things. He asked for meetings. He sent emails that swung wildly between charm and intimidation. "I built that company. You're being vindictive. Think about my reputation." I responded once. "John, you build it with my family's money, my connections, and my patience. This isn't revenge. This is accounting." After that, I let the lawyers speak. I moved into the guest wing of the house not because I had to, but because I wanted space to breathe while the paperwork moved like a slow, powerful river. Friends came by with casseroles and curiosity. I accepted the casseroles. I rejected the curiosity. "I'm fine," I said pleasantly, every single time. They didn't believe me. That was their problem. The first whisper of scandal. News travels fast in polite neighborhoods. By the third week, people knew John had cheated. By the fourth, they knew I'd taken half the business. By the fifth, they were deeply concerned about my mental state. Concern is a fascinating mask. It hides judgment beautifully. One woman, Carol, I think, tilted her head sympathetically and said, "Betsy, you must be so fragile right now." I smiled. "Actually," I said, "I've never felt sturdier." She blinked like I'd spoken another language. Daniel, at a distance. Daniel and I talked every day. Not long, dramatic calls. Just connection. He told me about his surf students. I told him about the way the house echoed now that John wasn't in it. He never asked me for money. Never asked me for favors. Never asked me for explanations. He didn't know about the business. He didn't know about the wealth. He didn't know about the house with more rooms than I needed. I told him I lived comfortably. That was true. I told him I was free. That was truer. One night he said, "I wish I could cook for you again." I laughed. "You burned the rice." "Yes," he said proudly, but with intention, and something in my chest softened. When John finally understood, John came to the house unannounced. He looked smaller. Anger does that when it no longer has an audience. "I made a mistake," he said, standing in my kitchen like a guest. "Yes," I agreed. You did. Aren't you even angry? He asked. I considered him carefully. No, I said. I'm educated. That hurt him more than yelling ever could. He looked around, at the flowers I'd replaced, the furniture I'd rearranged. You've changed. Yes, I said again. I stopped waiting. The choice everyone feared. The divorce finalized quietly. No drama, no courtroom spectacle, just signatures and silence. The day the papers came through, I booked another flight to Miami. Friends were horrified. Already? Aren't you rushing? At your age? I didn't answer the last question. I stopped answering questions that assumed I needed permission. When I landed, Daniel was waiting. He hugged me like I was expected. Not rescued, not saved. Expected? He walked the beach that night, waves curling at our feet. I don't know what this is, he said honestly, but I know it matters to me. I stopped walking and looked at him. It matters to me too, I said. Enough to be brave. 2 weeks later, sitting on the balcony with the ocean humming below us, Daniel reached into his backpack. Not a velvet box, a simple ring, silver, unassuming. I don't have much, he said, but I know what I feel, and I don't want to live cautiously with you. I thought of John, of decades of caution, of love rationed out carefully like sugar in hard times. Yes, I said immediately. Daniel laughed, stunned. You didn't even think. I've done enough thinking for one lifetime, I replied. Now I'm choosing. I didn't tell him about the house, or the money, or the business. I wanted to be loved before I was known for what I owned. Because if this was real, if this was honest, it had to start clean. The ocean roared its approval, and somewhere far away, I knew John would eventually hear. And I knew without cruelty, without spite, he would regret it. If you want to know how brave you really are, don't climb a mountain. Fall in love at an age when society expects you to fade politely into the background. That's when the real test begins. The return that shocked everyone. I came home married, just like that. No announcement, no warning, no apology tour. Daniel carried one suitcase. I carried two, and not one of them was emotional baggage. At the airport, he took my hand instinctively, the way men do when they aren't thinking about appearances. That was the first mistake, according to everyone else. The second mistake was smiling. Neighbors stared. Friends paused mid-sentence. One woman actually said, out loud, "Oh, how nice," in the tone usually reserved for ugly babies. Daniel noticed. Do they not like me? He asked later, genuinely confused. I kissed his cheek. They don't know you, I said. And some people panic when women my age don't ask permission. Introducing him to my world carefully. I didn't bring him to the big house right away. We stayed in a modest rental near the water. I told him I liked simplicity. That wasn't a lie. It was a choice. He cooked. I read. We walked in the evenings. He told me about his dreams, nothing extravagant. Teaching, traveling, building a life that felt honest. Not once did he ask what I could give him. Only what I liked. Only what made me laugh. Only what scared me. That's how I knew. The first direct attack. It came from my sister. It always does. Betsy, she said over lunch, leaning forward like a prosecutor. This isn't serious. I buttered my bread calmly. I'm married. That's serious by definition. She lowered her voice. He's young enough to be your grandson. I met her eyes. My grandson never looked at me like I was the son. Silence. She tried again. People are talking. Yes, I said. They always do when a woman chooses happiness over obedience. When John found out, John learned the news the way all men like him do, through gossip they once dismissed as unimportant. He showed up again, uninvited, predictable. This is insane, he said, pacing my living room. You're humiliating yourself. No, I corrected gently. I'm humiliating you. There's a difference. He's using you, John snapped. They always do. I laughed, actually laughed. You didn't even know how much money I had until after we were married, I said. And you still managed to spend it. That landed. He stared at me, realization finally cracking through his pride. You really love him. I nodded. And he loves me. Without footnotes. John's voice dropped. You'll regret this. I stepped closer, just enough for him to hear the truth. No, I said. You will, quietly, in moments when no one's watching. He left without another word. The reveal. I waited 6 months before telling Daniel the truth. About the house. About the business. About the money. I didn't dramatize it. I just showed him the deed. He blinked, sat down, ran a hand through his hair. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not angry, just surprised. "Because I wanted to know if you loved me," I said, "not what I owned." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Well," he said, "this explains the wine." That was it. No demands, no entitlement, no sudden interest in control, just laughter. Relief washed through me like rain after heat. Living loudly, finally. We traveled. We danced. We held hands in public. Some people smiled kindly. Some looked away. Some stared like we were a social experiment. Daniel never let go of my hand. And me? I stopped shrinking. I wore bold colors. I cut my hair shorter. I laughed louder. I stopped explaining. Because here's the thing no one prepares you for. When you stop living for others, you start living for real. And real love doesn't care about age. It cares about courage. They expected me to come crawling back. Not because they knew me, because they knew the script. Wife gets betrayed. Wife cries. Wife forgives or withers. Wife becomes a cautionary tale wrapped in a cardigan. But I wasn't interested in being anyone's moral lesson. I wanted to be my own love story. The neighborhood tribunal. The first time I brought Daniel to my real home, my big home, the one John used to stride through like a king, every curtain on the street twitched. We walked up the front path with grocery bags, because we needed eggs, not applause. Daniel whistled softly. "This place is, wow," he said. "It's just a building," I replied. "Don't let it start bossing you around." He grinned at that, leaned down, and kissed my temple right there on the porch. That kiss was nothing and everything. It wasn't meant for the neighbors, but it landed on them like a declaration. Inside, he wandered from room to room, not with greed, but with boyish curiosity. "You really grew up with money," he said, half amused. "I grew up with rules," I corrected. "Money was just the wallpaper." He turned, serious now. "Do you ever miss the old life?" I thought of John's careful routines, his dead-eyed gratitude, the way he spoke to me like I was a function, not a woman. "No," I said. "I miss the idea I had of it, but I don't miss the reality." Daniel nodded once, like he was filing that truth safely away. Then he went to the kitchen and started unpacking groceries as if he'd always belonged there. That's the thing about the right man. He doesn't act like he's visiting your life. He acts like he's building one with you. What I did with my half. When the divorce dust settled, people expected me to be vindictive. I wasn't. I was strategic. Half of the business was mine. John had strutted around for years pretending it grew out of the ground through sheer masculinity. Now he had to look at the paperwork, at my name, at my signature, at reality. I didn't fire him. I didn't ruin him. I didn't need a public spectacle. Instead, I hired a brilliant operations director, female, efficient, allergic to nonsense, and made it clear the company would run with transparency and professionalism. John hated that more than he would have hated a screaming match. Because you can dismiss a hysterical woman, you can't dismiss a calm one with legal rights and a plan. The business improved, profits went up, and people started congratulating me. That was delicious. The dinner party that tried to shame me. A few months later, I attended a charity dinner, same crowd, same pearls, same judgments. Daniel came with me in a simple suit, his hair combed back, looking handsome in a way that didn't beg for approval. One woman's sharp nose, sharper tone cornered me near the champagne. "Betsy," she said, eyes flicking to Daniel like he was a stray dog I'd brought inside. "Isn't this a bit inappropriate?" I sipped my champagne. "Inappropriate," I repeated slowly, like tasting the word. "Yes," she said. "People are concerned." I leaned closer, smiling sweetly. "Let me tell you what's inappropriate," I said. "Cheating on your wife in her bed, lying for years, using someone's love like it's a bank account." Her face stiffened. "And let me tell you what's appropriate," I continued, still smiling. "A grown woman deciding she's not done being adored." She sputtered. "But his age, I didn't marry his birth certificate," I said. "I married his heart. Mine still works too." Then I walked away, arm linked with Daniel's, leaving her standing there with her concern like a soggy napkin. Daniel murmured, "Are you always this dangerous?" I patted his hand. "Only when necessary." The moment John begged without saying please. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I was in the garden, clipping roses, when I heard the gate. I turned and saw John standing there like a man who'd lost his map. Older, paler, less certain. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like a man finally meeting the consequences he'd avoided his entire life. "Betsy," he said. I kept clipping. "I heard you've been doing well." "Yes," I said. I have. His gaze drifted toward the house, toward the windows, toward the life that used to be his simply because he'd assumed it always would be. I made a mistake, he said again, like the phrase had become his religion. I stood up, wiped my hands on my gardening apron, and faced him fully. John swallowed. He won't last. I laughed once, short and bright. John, I said, you lasted. And look what that got me. His jaw tightened. You're throwing away decades. I tilted my head. No, I'm refusing to throw away the decades I have left. His voice cracked not dramatically, but enough to reveal the fear beneath it. What if you get hurt? I stepped closer until he had to look me in the eye. I was hurt, I said calmly. For years, quietly, by you. He flinched. Then softer I added, this isn't the part where I come back. This is the part where you learn to live with what you did. He looked like he might argue, but the fight was gone. So he did the one thing prideful men do when they've lost control. He tried to poison my happiness with doubt. You'll be a joke, he whispered. People will laugh at you. I smiled, gentle as a closing door. They already did, I said, and I'm still happy. John stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then he turned and left, and I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. The life I chose. That night, Daniel found me on the balcony with a blanket around my shoulders. Long day? He asked. John came by, I said. Daniel's face tightened, but he didn't posture. He didn't demand. He just sat beside me. What did he want? He asked. To remind me what people might say, I replied. To scare me back into being small. Daniel took my hand. And did it work? I looked at him. This meant everyone judged before they knew him, and I felt something deep and steady. No, I said. I'm done being small. He kissed my knuckles. Good. I rested my head on his shoulder, listening to the night insects sing. And I thought about my mother. You should marry not the one you love, but the one who loves you. I finally understood what she meant. Not because love is useless, but because love without devotion is just a pretty trap. John may have been the one I loved once, but Daniel was the one who loved me boldly, openly, without treating my heart like a bargaining chip. My final word to the world. If you're watching this and you're 55 plus, 60 plus, 70 plus, if you've been faithful, supportive, patient, and you've been betrayed, listen to me. Don't you dare think your life is over. It's not. You're not too old. You're not too late. You're not too anything. You are simply at the age where you finally have the courage to stop auditioning for approval. People will judge. Let them. They judged me when I stayed too. At least now they're judging a woman who's loved. And yes, my husband is younger than my grandson. But who are you to judge me? You weren't there when I swallowed loneliness in a marriage bed. You weren't there when I funded a man's dream and got repaid with betrayal. You weren't there when I walked out with my dignity intact and my future wide open. I was, and I chose joy. Somewhere out there, John is living with his regret like a heavy coat he can't take off. And me, I'm living with love, light as ocean air, sharp as lipstick, and utterly, beautifully free.